Thank you for joining us today. We have as a guest Catherine Allen, who is the president of Interpret America. Catherine, can you please tell us in a few words, what is Interpret America?
Well, Interpret America is basically an advocacy organization that was founded 10 years ago. Our mission is to raise the profile of interpreting, and we do that through gatherings and events and blogs and supporting anything we possibly can to help the field talk to itself and also to be seen from the outside world in a more unified way. So to raise up our field however we can.
Great. Amazing. Thank you for all your work.
Thank you.
So, Catherine, looking at how the interpreters as a profession has been affected by COVID-19, what are the lessons learned? What are the challenges? What did you see happen in the world?
Well, I think we're still in the middle of lessons learned and we're still in the middle of challenges. The biggest immediate challenge for interpreting is that it is primarily in most countries in the world an on-site profession. In the US, it's 80% on-site. So 80% of interpreters stopped working pretty much overnight in the space of about 2 weeks, right, as things shut down across the country and in other parts of the world, including in our august areas of conference interpreting, everybody just stopped working. And so it's been a real crisis, I think, on a personal and professional level for many people who just their income stopped. And then the next big impact has been to see the acceleration of the adoption of all kinds of remote interpreting, this trend that we've been tracking for 10 years, saying it's coming, it's kind of here, it's starting to penetrate, and now it became a necessity overnight across the board in many, many areas, even that weren't trying to tap interpreting before. So there's been a kind of a two sides of a coin happening. And of course, that's a huge challenge for companies and for interpreters, especially interpreters having to and navigate that system when it wasn't on their, immediate agenda, if that makes sense. So it's been huge. I mean, it's been quite catastrophic, I'd say, for the field. I mean, there's been a lot of positives I've seen out of it and an amazing amount of sort of unity and help and support and generosity, but it's been hard.
So some of these new solutions that came out for interpreters, the technology, the way of working remotely, do you see them from your perspective? Are they here to stay, or are they long term? Are they temporary? What role do you see technology playing in the tomorrow's world of interpreting?
I think they were already here to stay, coming in slowly, and now I think they're here to stay, and probably we'll see a lot more use of remote interpreting on a permanent basis than we had before. I mean, clearly we're going to go back to on-site interpreting, and we will have on-site appointments, and it just depends on what area of interpreting you're talking about. I think in the healthcare and community and legal side, we already had some infrastructure in place for VRI, for the video remote interpreting, and the OPI, the over the phone interpreting. And where there was infrastructure, I think it's been expanded and built upon, and interpreters have been onboarded. And I think there will be pushback to let go of that, especially because of the cost efficiencies it brings. I'm not saying that's a great thing necessarily for all language access or interpreters, but I think there will be more use of it. And the other side of that is the need for remote simultaneous interpreting, which is a different kind of platform. The only platforms really that work well for that were all on the conference side, and they are absolutely booming. I mean, those platforms have gone from startups to we need you to scale at a level that no one was really prepared for. And that's great on some levels because it means our ability to do those kinds of meetings are going to be a lot better. But we don't have a good platform on our community side and for healthcare and for education and all the ways we actually need to have the ability to bring in simultaneous interpreting for public health announcements and government communication with the population. Like the only kind of partial platform that has a solution for that is Zoom. So to answer, I'm not trying to ramble, but I'm just saying it varies across the board. I think there is no doubt we are going to have remote interpreting as a fixed part of our landscape now. And we have a lot of catch-up work to do to make sure that interpreters' work conditions and livelihoods have quality and competence and fairness built into that kind of work, and also to make sure that we do everything we can to make that access be equivalent for the people who depend upon our interpreting, if that makes sense. But yeah, it's going to be a continued part of the landscape.
That makes a lot of sense. And what are your thoughts on how this new reality, the pandemic, did it hinder language access, or did it help with language access? That we suddenly were working through technology. What did you see happen to language access in the last few months?
I think for me overall, it's been a hindrance. It is definitely limited language access. I think, again, for the area in our country where you had the most penetration of remote would be on over the phone services in healthcare and finances and certain kinds of services. And so perhaps those areas were able to continue to provide, services that were already in place. But, all of a sudden the entire world needed to be able to hear what was coming out of state governments and county offices and the local health team that came out to try and guide how your county and how your city was going to navigate this. And those areas really weren't plugged into language access to begin with the exception of a few larger urban areas, cities that had those programs in place, that had connected their public health and their city governments to language access services on site or online. Really, so perhaps they were able to do a better job at what I see outside in the rest of the country is just kind of a almost complete lack of communication and people finding information, how, who became the public health informers for so many languages of, and immigrant language communities in this country were local radio stations, the local radio station that's in Spanish or in Vietnamese or, in Russian. And then they become the focal point or, your Facebook page or your friends, because the actual organisms that were responsible for making sure language access was part of their communications really failed. At least that's what I've seen anecdotally. I mean, it just has not been a pretty wide loss of access, in my perspective around COVID related information anyway.
And possibly, from what I'm hearing you saying, some of the marginalized communities are still struggling to receive information about what's going on still today.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I mean, think about my state of California. We've got 230 or so languages of, that are identified that communities speak. And I can guarantee you that information about COVID has not gone out in 230 languages anywhere. So yes, that people are relying on other sources to get that information. Right. And it's not that other sources don't exist. It's just not the access that I, as an English speaker, just have effortless ability to, gain. It's like, okay, I go to the website, I see what they say, I sign up for the Instagram account or whatever, however it is that I'm going to be getting that information. It's really easy for me to get it. If I speak Laotian or Cambodian, I'm not quite sure where I go for that. Is it going to be, it's not going to be on the website, and the Instagram account's going to be in English. So that information is getting filtered through multiple layers and through other outlets. And then it becomes much harder to know what's real and what's the best information or what's the officially sanctioned information, if that makes sense. So yeah, I think it's ongoing.
So how do you see COVID-19 outbreak change the role of the interpreter? And also we have all of the riots and community unrest and demonstrations happening around the country. So we're having kind of two things happening at the same time. How do you see this change the role of the interpreter or highlight the role of the interpreter from your perspective?
Well, there's a lot of perspectives on that, aren't there? I mean, I think in some areas, and as we were kind of chatting before as well, like in places that really have language access as a priority and were able to understand that the interpreter needed to actually become more defined as part of the team instead of an outside service that gets parachuted into the team of a healthcare team, whatever the team may be. I think in some cases, perhaps and in some institutions, they finally understood and got the aha, hey, the interpreter needs to be a full-blown member of this team. But I would say that's probably the minority of cases. And in most cases, I think it's served to push interpreters out of arenas they were already in. And now they've been struggling to get back in or to make their case for how they can come back in remotely. And I've seen that at a very deep level, even in conference interpreting, even in Europe, where you've got, many laws that require, 25 languages or 27 languages have to be always interpreted and translated for any of the governmental communications in the European Union. And they're holding remote meetings and using and interpreting 4 or 5 languages. And there's 20 languages that have been left out of that, which means there are 20 language interpreter communities that are being left out of that. And I just think it repeats over and over across the board. So for me, I've seen one thing I have said among the interpreting community, a huge explosion of communication between us. Like one of the things Interpret America's worked for 10 years is to get our field to talk to each other. And we are seeing people talking to each other across all the different spectrums. And I think in that sense, in our own role inside our own profession, a lot of really positive things are happening. But in terms of how our visibility as a needed service, I think it's been a setback. And I think we have a lot of work to do to make sure we become visible again on those platforms and on those new remote channels. And then to answer the second part of your question about, what we're living through this week today, this whole last 10 days with the death of George Floyd and, all the protests and the sort of scream I see for visibility and being seen and respected and that you matter. That is what interpreters do in the most fundamental role that we have. It is that we help people become visible to each other. We give people their words and their voices across languages. And so I see our role as more important than ever. And I just hope we can find ways to continue that fight, so to make our job visible so that we can continue to help everybody's voices and lives be as visible as they need to be, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm being articulate, but it's just such a deeply held value for me that that's what we do. And it's so painful to see that invisibility be so increased during this time. And I think that part of what we're seeing happen in the country is kind of a scream about that, about that need for visibility.
So it's not just from interpreter side, it's also from the community side, right? Communities are saying we want to be heard, we want to be an equal part. We are an equal part of this whole society.
Yeah.
And we don't want to be marginalized because of our race, our ethnicity, because of where we come from, or because we don't, speak a certain language.
Right.
So in a way, part of this are, language rights are human rights, and the role that interpreters play in that.
It is, yeah. I mean, there's nothing more fundamental than being able to speak or sign or express ourselves. And there's no easier way to silence somebody than to take their language away or their ability to have their message heard. So to me, I guess that's where I place my sense of urgency and mission and how I can be of service in this particular moment.
So if you were to leave interpreters with, advice or some message that you want to convey out to the interpreting community, what would be that message at this time?
Well, hang tough. I think there's no other message than for that. But I think, I just remind us all that times of tremendous disruption, always lead to something new. And our field, this is just a time of disruption in general and has been, for our societies over the last 20 years in particular. And we see so much upheaval in how things are done. And, it's really natural for us to want things to go back. Okay, I had this set up this way. I used to work this way. It worked this way. And there's a lot of grief when you lose that and frustration. But I think the need for our service is not going anywhere. It's just going to expand there is a very good chance that this adoption of remote will over time expand our ability to work and who we work with and who we work for. So I just encourage people to stay as flexible as they can and to learn those new skill sets that we have to learn. Unfortunately, we just are at a point now in our field where if you don't, that part of our skill set has to be technological in order for us to do the work we want to do. And so there are a lot of resources out there, from all of the professional associations, Interpret America, and the projects that Mila, that you're doing here. I mean, there are so many people just flooding our field now with information and resources and help. So I encourage you to get online, get on Twitter, get on your social media, find your local associations and find those webinars and the podcasts and the radio shows and the classes that are being taught, because I do feel like, again, we're needed and we need to fight for our place in the communication role that we serve, and we need to have the dignity of pay and the dignity of good work and the dignity of being there. So if that makes sense. So I'd say it's rough, but I always look forward with a positive lens. I think this is a big expansion in its own way, and we can be more in the driver. The more we can be in the driver's seat of that, the better.
I have heard some concerns raised through the industry that there may be interpreters leaving the profession permanently, and that which may create a shortage of interpreters in the future. So have you heard this through all of your communication? What's your perspective? Do you see people leaving the profession?
I mean, I don't have any statistics, to be able to shore that up, although I imagine eventually we will find that out. It would make complete sense to me that we would see people leave the profession. It's already, at least on the immigration side and healthcare interpreting and legal and community and education, it's a pretty low margin wage that so many people earn. And if you can't get work, you've got to find work somewhere. So if we can't help people, if we can't help re-expand those jobs, I think we're going to lose on-site jobs. So we need to help people get online jobs, right? I mean, I think those in leadership in the field and the companies who help, help us hook up with the people we interpret for, it's like there's a lot of responsibility for us to try to keep those opportunities expanding. But it would not surprise me at all to hear that we lose people, especially people of languages of lesser diffusion and indigenous languages. It's like if they can't make money off the use of their language, they're going to go make money where they can to have a living paycheck. So I think it probably will be the case that our numbers will shrink, for at least temporarily.
So it's critically important that interpreters stay in their roles, that interpreters continue to be there to provide language access, because that empowers entire communities.
Right.
Access to healthcare, education, legal system, justice. So it's a pretty critical role that
it is it is a critical role. You and I are on the same page. And if you have the ability to continue to educate the people you work with, if you have the ability to continue to celebrate what we do and connect people, then go for it, because that's what's needed. I mean, we don't want to lose the progress we've made. We've fought so hard in this country over the last 30 years to expand that language access. And I hope that the pandemic will be a temporary retraction and not a permanent one. We don't want to lose what we've worked so hard for.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for your time, and thank you for sharing your thoughts. Thank you.
Well, thank you for doing this series. It's great. Thank you so much. I'm honored.